He had discovered that success without empathy was hollow, that profit without purpose was meaningless, and that he had been living a life disconnected from the people who made his achievements possible. The heartbreak wasn't just about Rosa's injury or the workers' struggles. It was about recognizing how much of his own humanity he had lost in pursuit of wealth and status. But as he looked at the faces of his employees, some still angry, some cautiously hopeful, Marcus realized that heartbreaking discoveries could also be the beginning of healing. The question now was whether he had the courage and wisdom to build something better from the ruins of what he had been before. Marcus stood among his co-workers in the main assembly area, his heart pounding as he watched the factory management prepare for his own arrival. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. In 15 minutes, he was supposed to slip away, change into his expensive suit, and return as the billionaire owner. Instead, he found himself unable to move from his position next to Rosa and her family. Mr. Henderson, the factory supervisor, was adjusting the microphone at a makeshift podium while security personnel checked the area one final time. Workers filled the large space, standing in groups based on their departments and shifts. Marcus could feel the nervous energy in the air as people whispered among themselves about what the visit might mean for their futures. "I wonder what he's really like," Maria said quietly, standing close to her mother for support. "Probably just another suit who's never worked a real day in his life," muttered Tom from behind them. Marcus looked around at these people who had become more than co-workers to him over the past 2 weeks. They had become friends, people he genuinely cared about and respected. The thought of deceiving them for even one more minute felt unbearable. "Attention, everyone," Mr. Henderson announced through the microphone. "Mr. Wellington's team has requested a slight delay. He'll be with us in approximately 10 minutes. Please remain in your positions." Marcus knew this was his cue to leave, to transform back into his billionaire identity and play the role everyone expected. Instead, he made a decision that surprised, even himself. "Rosa," he said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something important." She looked at him with concern. "What is it, Mike? You look pale." Marcus took a deep breath and looked around at the faces of people who had trusted him, worked beside him, and shared their lives with him. Tom, Sarah, Janet, Carlos, Maria, Miguel, and dozens of others who had welcomed him as one of their own. "My name isn't Mike Wheeler," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Rosa frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I haven't been honest with you about who I am." Marcus felt his hands shaking as he prepared to reveal the truth. "My real name is Marcus Wellington." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning hit home. Rosa's eyes widened in shock and Maria gasped audibly. Tom took a step backward as if he had been struck. "You're him," Sarah said, her voice filled with disbelief and growing anger. "You're the owner." "Yes," Marcus replied simply. "I am." The news spread through the immediate group like ripples in a pond. Workers turned to stare at Marcus with expressions ranging from confusion to betrayal to outright anger. The buzz of conversation in the assembly area began to die down as more people became aware that something significant was happening. "You lied to us," Carlos said, his voice heavy with hurt and anger. "You worked beside us, ate with us, came to our home, and you were lying the entire time." "I was trying to understand what it was really like to work here," Marcus explained desperately. "I wanted to know the truth about my own company." "And what did you learn?" Rosa asked, her voice cold in a way Marcus had never heard before. "Did you learn that we're good enough to fool but not good enough to trust with the truth?" "No, that's not what this was about," Marcus said, but he could see that his explanations weren't reaching them. The damage was done. Maria looked at him with tears in her eyes. "You knew about Mom's workers' compensation case all along. You knew about all of it. When you promised me that things would get better, you weren't hoping they would get better. You were planning to make them better." "Yes," Marcus admitted. I fixed Rosa's case because it was the right thing to do, after watching us suffer for months, Carlos interjected angrily. After seeing what your company's lawyers were putting my family through, then you decided to fix it. By now, the entire assembly area had grown quiet as workers realized something extraordinary was happening. Mr. Henderson was approaching with security personnel, looking confused and concerned about the disturbance. "Is there a problem here?" Henderson asked. Marcus stood up straighter and spoke loudly enough for everyone in the area to hear. "My name is Marcus Wellington. I own this company. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working here as Mike Wheeler because I wanted to understand what it was really like to be an employee of Wellington Industries." The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of workers stared at him in shock, trying to process what they had just heard. Henderson's face went white, and the security personnel immediately moved closer to Marcus. "I know you all feel betrayed right now," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the assembly area. "And you have every right to feel that way. I deceived you about who I was, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to know that everything I learned while working beside you has changed how I see this company and my responsibilities as its owner." "Pretty speech," Tom called out angrily. "But what does it matter? You got your little experiment, and now you'll go back to your mansion and forget all about us." "No," Marcus said firmly. "That's not what's going to happen. Rosa, would you please come up here with me?" Rosa hesitated, clearly torn between her anger at his deception and her confusion about what was happening. Maria gently pushed her mother forward, and Rosa slowly walked to the front of the group. 2 weeks ago, this woman was facing financial ruin because my company's insurance policies were designed to minimize payouts rather than help injured workers, Marcus announced to the crowd. Rosa Martinez gave 15 years of her life to this company, was injured on the job due to faulty equipment, and then was abandoned when she needed help most. He turned to face Rosa directly. "I can't undo the months of suffering my policies caused your family, but I can promise you that no employee of this company will ever face what you faced again." Marcus then addressed the entire group. "I came here because I had heard there were problems at this facility. What I discovered was that the problems weren't just here. They were in the way I was running this entire company. I had become so focused on profits and efficiency that I forgot that my success is built on the hard work and dedication of people like all of you." "So what happens now?" Sarah called out. "You've had your revelation. Are you going to close the factory and move production overseas like we heard you were planning?" Marcus felt every eye in the building focused on him. This was the moment of truth, not just for his relationship with these workers, but for the kind of person he wanted to be going forward. "The Millbrook facility will not only remain open, it will be expanded," he announced. "We're going to invest $50 million in new equipment, safety improvements, and expanded production capabilities. We're increasing wages by 30% across the board, improving benefits, and implementing profit sharing so that when the company does well, you do well too." The crowd began to murmur with surprise and cautious optimism, but Marcus wasn't finished. "More importantly, I'm changing how this company operates at every level. We're implementing worker safety committees with real authority to shut down unsafe operations. We're creating employee councils that will have direct input into company policies. And we're establishing a fund to support employees and their families during medical emergencies." Marcus looked directly at Rosa and her family. "Rosa, I'd like to offer you a position as the Director of Worker Relations for the entire company. Your job would be to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Rosa stared at him in shock. "I don't understand. Why would you offer me that?" "Because you understand what it means to be a working person in a way that I never did. Because you care about people in a way that my business school education never taught me to care. And because I need someone I can trust to tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." The assembly area was completely silent as workers tried to process what they were hearing. Marcus knew that his words were meaningless without action. but he hoped that his time as Mike Wheeler had earned him at least a chance to prove his sincerity. "I know that trust has to be earned," Marcus continued. "I know that my deception has hurt people I've come to care about deeply, but I also know that the 2 weeks I spent working beside you were the most valuable education of my life. You taught me what it means to work with dignity, to care about your co-workers, and to take pride in doing good work even when the conditions aren't perfect." He paused and looked around the room at faces that showed a mixture of skepticism, hope, and lingering anger. "I can't change the fact that I lied about who I was, but I can promise you that everything I learned as Mike Wheeler will guide how I act as Marcus Wellington from now on. This company belongs to all of us, and it's time we started acting like it." As Marcus finished speaking, he realized that his heartbreaking discovery wasn't what he had expected when he started this journey. He had thought he would uncover problems with safety or management that he could fix with money and policy changes. Instead, he had discovered something much more profound and much more painful. The news of Mr. Wellington's upcoming visit spread through the factory like electricity through water. Marcus watched his co-workers react with a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and skepticism as they prepared for the arrival of the billionaire owner. They had never met. "I heard he's worth $12 billion, whispered Janet during their Tuesday morning break. "Can you imagine having that much money?" Tom shook his head doubtfully. "Rich guys like that don't usually come to places like this unless something big is happening. Either they're planning something good, or they're planning to shut us down and want to deliver the news personally." Sarah looked worried. "What if all these sudden improvements are just to make us feel better before they announce the closure? You know, soften the blow?" Marcus felt sick listening to their concerns. These people had learned not to trust good news because their experience had taught them that companies didn't invest in workers unless there was an ulterior motive. The fact that his own employees were suspicious of his efforts to help them revealed just how badly his company had treated them in the past. "Maybe he's different," Marcus suggested carefully. "Maybe he really wants to understand what it's like to work here." "Rich people don't understand working people," Carlos said firmly. He had started working at the factory part-time to help support his family while Rosa recovered. "They live in a different world. To them, we're just numbers on a spreadsheet." Throughout the week, Marcus continued working his shifts while secretly coordinating his official visit through Jennifer. The safety inspectors arrived and began upgrading equipment, and workers started receiving notices about wage increases and improved benefits. But instead of celebrating, many employees seemed more anxious than ever. "It's too good to be true," Rosa told Marcus when he visited her Wednesday evening. She had returned to work in a modified position, helping with inventory and training, and seemed both grateful and confused by the sudden changes. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Maybe sometimes good things just happen," Marcus suggested. Rosa studied his face carefully. "Mike, you've been asking a lot of questions since you started working here, and now all these changes are happening right after you arrived. Are you sure you're just a regular factory worker?" Marcus felt his heart race. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. There's something about you that doesn't quite fit. The way you talk, the questions you ask, the way you seem to know things about the company that regular workers wouldn't know. I'm just interested in understanding how things work," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Rosa nodded slowly, but Marcus could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, whoever you are, I'm grateful that you care. Not many people take the time to really listen to workers like us." Thursday brought a development that shook Marcus to his core. During lunch break, Sarah approached him with a newspaper clipping she had printed from the internet. "Mike, I was curious about this Wellington guy, so I looked him up online," she said, showing him a business magazine article. "Look at this picture. Doesn't he kind of look like you?" Marcus stared at a professional photo of himself from a corporate event 6 months earlier. In the picture, he was wearing an expensive suit and had perfectly styled hair, but the facial features were unmistakably his. His heart pounded as he tried to think of a response. I guess there's a resemblance, he said as casually as possible. People say I look like a lot of different celebrities and business people. Sarah studied the photo and then looked at Marcus carefully. Yeah, maybe it's just the general features, but it's weird, right? What are the odds? Tom leaned over to look at the picture. Nah, Mike's too normal to be a billionaire. This guy probably went to Harvard and has never done a real day's work in his life. Marcus forced a laugh, but he knew his cover was becoming increasingly fragile. Someone was going to figure out who he really was, and when that happened, everything would change. That evening, Marcus sat in his motel room and called Jennifer for a final briefing on his official visit. They reviewed his schedule, the talking, points for his meetings with workers, and the media strategy for announcing the factory improvements. Sir, I have to ask one more time. Are you sure about this approach? Meeting with workers individually, touring the floor, taking questions? It's very unusual for someone in your position. That's exactly why I need to do it, Marcus replied. These people have never had a chance to speak directly to the person who makes decisions about their lives. I think I owe them that opportunity. And what about Mike Wheeler? How do you plan to handle that identity? Marcus had been dreading this question. I'm not sure yet. I may have to find a way to end that identity before the visit. You could just stop showing up to work. People disappear from factory jobs all the time. The suggestion made Marcus feel nauseated. After everything he had shared with these people, the idea of just vanishing felt like a betrayal. I'll figure something out. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with a forecast of snow later in the day. Marcus went through his usual routine of getting ready for work, knowing it would be his last day as Mike Wheeler. He had decided to work his normal shift and then find a way to slip away before the official visit in the afternoon. At the factory, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Workers had been instructed to dress nicely and be on their best behavior for Mr. Wellington's visit. The entire facility had been cleaned and organized, and supervisors were walking around making last-minute adjustments. I'm nervous, admitted Maria, who had been given the afternoon off from the grocery store to attend the employee meeting with her mother. What if he asks me a question and I say something stupid? Just be yourself, Marcus advised. The best thing you can do is tell him the truth about what it's like to work here and live in this community. What if he's one of those rich people who doesn't really care about regular people? She asked. Marcus looked at this bright, hard-working girl who had been forced to grow up too fast because of his company's policies. I think you might be surprised. Sometimes people are different than what you expect. At 11 o'clock, Marcus received word that Mr. Wellington's motorcade had arrived at the factory. Through the windows, he could see black SUVs and luxury cars pulling into the parking lot. Security personnel were setting up barriers and checking credentials. Marcus knew that in 30 minutes he was supposed to transform from Mike Wheeler, factory worker, into Marcus Wellington, billionaire CEO. But as he looked around at his co-workers, who were nervous about meeting the man who controlled their futures, he realized that the most important conversation he had ever had was about to begin. The question was whether he could find the courage to have that conversation honestly, knowing that the truth might destroy the relationships he had built and the trust he had earned over the past 2 weeks. As the announcement came over the intercom for all workers to gather in the main assembly area for Mr. Wellington's address, Marcus made a decision that would change not only his own life, but the lives of everyone who had welcomed Mike Wheeler as one of their own. Sunday morning brought Marcus an unexpected phone call from Sarah. Her voice was urgent and worried when she asked him to meet her at the diner on Main Street. When he arrived, he found her sitting in a corner booth with several other factory workers, all looking anxious and upset. Mike, we need to talk to you about something important, Sarah said as he sat down. We've been hearing rumors about the factory and we don't know what to believe. Tom leaned forward across the table. Word is that management is planning to close down the Millbrook facility entirely. Move all the production to Mexico or somewhere overseas where it's cheaper. Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Where did you hear this?" "My cousin works in the office," explained Janet. "She overheard a phone call between Mr. Henderson and someone from corporate. They were talking about a timeline and severance packages." "When?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer. "Sounds like they're planning to make the announcement after the holidays. Give people a few months' notice, then shut it down by spring," Sarah replied. "Mike, this factory is the biggest employer in Millbrook. If it closes, this whole town dies." Marcus looked around the table at these people he had come to respect and care about over the past week. They were scared, and they had every right to be. Without the factory, many of them would have to leave Millbrook to find work, abandoning the community that had been their home for decades. "What can we do?" asked Tom. "Is there any way to fight this?" Marcus wished he could tell them the truth, that he was the one person who could definitely stop the closure. Instead, he had to maintain his cover as Mike Wheeler, concerned co-worker. "Have you tried talking to management? Or maybe contacting the corporate office directly?" Janet laughed bitterly. "Right, like they care what we think. We're just numbers, to them. They've probably already done the math and figured out they can make more money somewhere else." "What about Rosa?" Marcus asked. "Does she know about this?" "We haven't told her yet," Sarah said. "She's got enough to worry about with her injury and the insurance problems. But Mike, if this factory closes, her family is completely screwed. Carlos can't support them on construction work alone, especially if there's no factory bringing money into the town." Marcus excused himself and walked to his car, where he immediately called Jennifer on his personal phone. "I need you to pull all the strategic planning documents for the Millbrook facility, everything about potential closures, relocations, or downsizing." "Sir, those documents are highly confidential. Is there a specific reason you need them?" "Just get them. And Jennifer, I want to know who has been discussing closing the Millbrook plant and when those discussions started." 2 hours later, Jennifer called back with information that made Marcus's worst fears come true. His business development team had indeed been evaluating the Millbrook facility for closure. The recommendation had been made 3 weeks ago, citing higher labor costs and older equipment compared to overseas alternatives. The final decision was scheduled to be made at the board meeting Marcus had missed, and the closure announcement was planned for early January. 600 people would lose their jobs, and the economic impact would devastate the entire community. Marcus realized that his undercover investigation had uncovered not just individual problems, but a systematic plan to destroy the livelihood of everyone he had met over the past week. Rosa's injury, the safety problems, the insurance issues, the unrealistic production quotas, they were all symptoms of a company that had stopped caring about its employees as human beings. That afternoon, Marcus decided to take a walk through Millbrook's business district. What he saw broke his heart. Many of the storefronts were already empty, casualties of economic pressures and changing shopping habits. The few businesses that remained were clearly struggling. If the factory closed, even these survivors would likely have to shut down. He stopped at Maria's grocery store and found her working the register with obvious fatigue. When she saw him, she managed a small smile. "Hi, Mr. Mike. How's your weekend?" "Good, thanks. How are things with your family?" Maria's smile faded. "Mom's having a really bad day with her hand. The pain medicine makes her sleepy, but when she doesn't take it, she can't sleep because it hurts too much. And we got another letter from the insurance company yesterday. They want her to see another doctor for another evaluation." Marcus wanted to tell her that he had already fixed the insurance problem, but his instructions wouldn't take effect until Monday, and he couldn't explain how he knew. Instead, he said, "Things will get better, Maria, I promise." "I hope so. Mom's talking about giving up and just accepting that they won't pay. She says fighting is costing us more than we can afford." Maria rang up a customer's groceries with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Mike, can I ask you something?" "Of course." You seem different from most of the factory workers I've met, like you've had more education or something. Why are you working there?" Marcus struggled to find an answer that wouldn't reveal his identity. "Sometimes life takes you in directions you don't expect. I'm just trying to figure some things out." "Well, I hope you figure it out soon. Good people like you shouldn't have to work in places where they don't care about your safety." That evening, Marcus sat in his motel room with a legal pad, trying to work out a plan. He could stop the factory closure with a single phone call, but that would reveal his identity and end his undercover investigation. He was learning things about his company and his employees that he never would have discovered as Marcus Wellington, Billionaire CEO. On the other hand, every day he waited was another day that good people like Rosa and her family suffered unnecessarily. The workers were planning their futures based on jobs that his executives intended to eliminate. The longer he maintained his deception, the more he felt like he was betraying the trust of people who had accepted him as one of their own. Marcus called Jennifer again and gave her new instructions. "I want you to prepare a complete reversal of the Millbrook closure plan. Full safety upgrades, equipment modernization, increased wages, improved benefits, the works. Cost is not a concern. Sir, the board will never approve this. The numbers don't make sense from a profitability standpoint. The board works for me, not the other way around," Marcus replied firmly. "Sometimes the right decision isn't the most profitable decision." "Mr. Wellington, I have to ask, what's happening to you out there? You're talking about spending tens of millions of dollars on a facility that generates modest profits at best." Marcus looked out his window toward the factory, where the night shift was just beginning their work. "I'm learning what it costs to be the kind of company I want us to be. And Jennifer, I'm learning that some costs are worth paying." Monday morning arrived with news that spread through the factory like wildfire. Rosa Martinez had received a call from the insurance company. Her workers' compensation claim had been approved. She would receive full medical coverage and back pay, and she was being offered a modified position at the factory that would accommodate her injury. "It's a miracle," Sarah told Marcus during their break. "Rosa was crying when she called me. Happy crying for the first time in months." Marcus smiled, feeling genuine satisfaction at the relief he had been able to provide. But his satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that Rosa's good news was only possible because he had been deceiving everyone about who he really was. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The company is sending safety inspectors this week to upgrade all the equipment, and they're talking about hiring more people and increasing wages." Tom joined their conversation, looking puzzled. "Something weird is going on. All these changes happening at once? It's like someone upstairs suddenly started caring about this place." Marcus felt the weight of his deception growing heavier. These people deserved to know the truth about who he was and why things were suddenly improving, but he also knew that revealing his identity would change everything about how they related to him. That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of his investigation. He called Jennifer and instructed her to schedule a visit to the Millbrook facility by Mr. Wellington for the following Friday. "I want to meet with the workers, tour the facility, and get their feedback on the changes we're implementing," he explained. "Sir, are you sure that's wise? You've been missing for over a week. People are starting to ask serious questions about your whereabouts." Marcus looked around the factory floor, watching his employees work with a mixture of hope and uncertainty about their future. It's time for Marcus Wellington to see what Mike Wheeler has learned, and it's time for these people to meet the man who's really responsible for their lives. Saturday morning arrived with a light rain that matched Marcus's somber mood. Sarah had arranged for him to visit Rosa Martinez that afternoon, describing him simply as a new co-worker who wanted to help. Marcus spent the morning walking through Millbrook's quiet streets, seeing the town with completely different eyes than when he had arrived just a week ago. He stopped at the local grocery store and bought flowers, a fruit basket, and some groceries he thought might be helpful for a family dealing with medical expenses. The store clerk, a teenage girl with tired eyes, rang up his purchases with mechanical efficiency. "You're new in town, aren't you?" she asked, making conversation. "Yes, I work at the factory," Marcus replied. "Just started this week." The girl's expression darkened slightly. "My mom used to work there, got hurt a few months ago. Now she can barely use her hand and the company is fighting her on everything. We're barely keeping the house." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. "Are you Maria Martinez?" The girl looked surprised. "Yeah. How did you know that?" "I work with some people who know your mom. They told me what happened. I'm actually going to visit her this afternoon." Maria's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "Mom doesn't like people knowing how bad things are. She's proud, you know. But it's been really hard. The medical bills keep coming, and Dad's construction work isn't steady. I'm working here after school and weekends, but it's not enough." Marcus wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that he would fix it all, but Mike Wheeler couldn't make those promises. Instead, he said, "Your mom has a lot of people who care about her at the factory. We're going to figure out ways to help." That afternoon, Marcus stood nervously on the Martinez family's front porch, holding his small gifts and trying to calm his racing heart. When the door opened, he found himself face to face with Rosa Martinez herself. She was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes, but Marcus immediately noticed how she held her injured hand protectively against her body. Her smile was warm but tired, the expression of someone who had been through too much, but was still fighting to remain hopeful. "You must be Mike," she said in accented English. "Sarah told me you wanted to visit. Please come in." The Martinez home was modest but filled with love. Family photos covered the walls, showing children's graduations, birthday parties, and holidays. The furniture was old but well-maintained, and everything was spotlessly clean. Marcus could see that this family took pride in their home, despite their financial struggles. Rosa's husband, Carlos, was a sturdy man with calloused hands who greeted Marcus with cautious friendliness. Their son, 16-year-old Miguel, sat at the kitchen table working on homework. The family had clearly been struggling to maintain normalcy despite the crisis they were facing. "Please sit," Rosa said, gesturing to the living room. "Would you like some coffee?" "That would be nice. Thank you." Marcus watched as Rosa attempted to prepare coffee with her injured hand, wincing slightly when she had to grip the pot. Without thinking, he stood up. "Please, let me help with that." Rosa looked, surprised but grateful. As they worked together in the kitchen, she began to tell him her story. She had come to the United States 22 years ago with her husband and infant daughter. They had both worked multiple jobs while learning English and saving money to buy their small house. "The factory job was good for us," she explained. "Steady work, decent pay for someone like me. I worked my way up from the floor to training new employees. I loved helping people learn their jobs and feel confident." "Sarah mentioned you were there for 15 years, Marcus prompted. Rosa's expression grew sad. "Yes, I thought I would retire from there someday. I was proud to work for such a big company. I thought they would take care of their workers." She showed him her injured hand, and Marcus had to fight to keep his composure. The scarring was severe, and her fingers had limited mobility. "The doctors say I might get back 60% of the use if I'm lucky. But even that means I can't do the detailed work I used to do." Carlos joined them, his voice carrying barely controlled anger. "They're saying it was her fault. Rosa, who trained half the people in that factory about safety. They're saying she wasn't being careful." "The safety guard was broken," Rosa said, quietly. "I reported it twice, but they said the machine was still safe to use if you were careful. The production schedule was behind, and they needed us to keep working." Marcus felt physically ill. He remembered Jennifer mentioning that the Millbrook facility had been pushing for increased production targets to improve their quarterly numbers. Those targets had apparently been more important than fixing safety equipment. "What about workers' compensation?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Rosa and Carlos exchanged a look. They have lawyers fighting everything, Carlos explained. First, they said she caused the accident. Then they said her injuries weren't as bad as she claimed. Now they're saying she can go back to work, but the doctor says she can't do the same job she used to do. And if she can't do her old job? Marcus asked. They'll have to let her go, Rosa said simply. After 15 years, I'll lose my job because I got hurt making their products. Maria appeared in the doorway, home from her shift at the grocery store. Marcus watched this family that had been torn apart by his company's policies and felt a shame deeper than anything he had ever experienced. These were good people who had played by the rules, worked hard, and been loyal to his company. In return, they had been abandoned when they needed help most. "Tell me about your plans for college, Maria," Marcus said, trying to find some brightness in the conversation. Maria's face lit up despite their circumstances. "I want to study business and accounting. I've always been good with numbers, and I want to help people like my family who don't understand all the complicated paperwork that companies use." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. This girl wanted to study business so she could protect working families from companies like his. Her mother's injury had inspired her to become an advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. As the evening progressed, Marcus learned more about the Martinez family's struggles. Carlos's construction work was sporadic, especially during winter months. Maria was working 20 hours a week while maintaining straight A's in school. Miguel was considering dropping out to get a job, though his parents were fighting against that decision. "Education is the most important thing," Rosa insisted. "We came here so our children could have opportunities we didn't have. They will stay in school no matter what we have to sacrifice." Marcus excused himself to use the bathroom, where he stood in front of the mirror and tried to process what he was feeling. This family's entire future was being destroyed by policies he had implemented to increase profits. Rosa's injury was devastating enough, but the company's response had turned a workplace accident into a family crisis. When he returned to the living room, he found Rosa looking through a photo album with her family. She showed him pictures from company picnics and holiday parties from years past. In the photos, Rosa looked happy and proud, surrounded by co-workers who obviously cared about her. "I miss my work family," she said softly. "Some of them still call and visit, but it's not the same. I feel like I let everyone down." "You didn't let anyone down," Marcus said firmly. "You were hurt doing your job. That's not your fault." "The company says it is," Carlos interjected bitterly. "They're lawyers. Keep saying she should have been more careful, that she should have refused to use the machine if she thought it was unsafe." "Easy for them to say," Maria added. "They don't understand what it's like when you need your job to feed your family. You can't just refuse to do what your supervisor tells you to do." As Marcus prepared to leave, Rosa walked him to the door. "Mike, thank you for coming. It means a lot to know that people at the factory still care about me. Sometimes I feel forgotten." "You're not forgotten," Marcus assured her. "And Rosa, I want you to know that things are going to get better. I can't explain how I know, but I promise you that your family is going to be okay." Rosa looked at him curiously. "You're a strange man, Mike Wheeler. There's something different about you, but I can see that you have a good heart." Driving back to his motel, Marcus made several phone calls. He instructed Jennifer to immediately approve Rosa Martinez's workers' compensation claim and to provide her with full medical coverage and income replacement. He also authorized a complete safety overhaul of the Millbrook facility, regardless of cost. But he knew that fixing Rosa's situation, while important, was only the beginning. His visit had revealed systematic problems that went far deeper than one injured worker or one unsafe factory. His entire business model was built on maximizing profits by minimizing costs, and he was beginning to understand that many of those costs were actually the well-being of the people who made his success possible. As he lay in his uncomfortable, Motel bed that night, Marcus realized that his undercover adventure had become something much more significant. He wasn't just investigating employee complaints anymore. He was confronting the fundamental question of what kind of man he wanted to be and what kind of company he wanted to run. Tomorrow would bring new revelations that would challenge everything he thought he knew about business, success, and responsibility. Marcus spent his second day at the factory paying closer attention to the conversations around him. During breaks, he positioned himself near different groups of workers, gradually piecing together fragments of information about Rosa Martinez. What he learned made his stomach turn. Rosa had worked at the factory for 15 years, starting when her children were young. She was known as one of the most reliable employees, often working double shifts when the factory needed extra production. 3 months ago, she had been operating one of the older cutting machines when something went wrong. The safety guard had apparently malfunctioned, and Rosa's hand had been severely injured. They rushed her to the hospital, explained Tom, a maintenance worker who had been there that day. Blood everywhere. We all thought she might lose her hand completely. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What happened after that? Well, that's where it gets ugly, Tom continued, lowering his voice. The company's insurance tried to say it was her fault, claimed she wasn't following safety procedures. Anyone who's worked with Rosa knows that's garbage. She was the one. Always reminding everyone else to be careful. Sarah joined the conversation, her face showing obvious anger. They made her jump through hoops for months. Doctors, paperwork, investigations. The whole time, she's got no income because she can't work with her hand messed up like that. Marcus asked carefully, "Is she getting help from the company?" The workers exchanged glances. "That's the thing," Sarah said. "She should be getting workers' compensation, but they're fighting it every step of the way. Her family is struggling bad. Her husband works construction, but that doesn't pay enough to cover their bills and her medical expenses, too." "Where is she now?" Marcus asked. "Still recovering at home. The doctors say she might get some use of her hand back, but it'll never be the same. And even if she could come back to work, they've been talking about replacing her position." Marcus excused himself and went to the bathroom, where he splashed cold water on his face and stared at his reflection. This woman had given 15 years of her life to his company, had been injured while making him money, and now his own company was abandoning her when she needed help most. That evening, Marcus drove through Millbrook's residential streets, looking for Rosa's address. He had gotten it from Jennifer, who had accessed the employee records without asking questions. The house was a small, well-maintained home with a neat garden and children's toys on the front porch. Through the window, he could see the warm glow of a television and the silhouettes of a family gathered in the living room. Marcus sat in his car for nearly an hour, watching the house and trying to work up the courage to knock on the door. What would he say? How could he explain his presence without revealing his true identity? Finally, he drove back to the motel, knowing he needed more information before approaching Rosa directly. The next day at work, Marcus volunteered for overtime, hoping to learn more about the factory's operations. Working the evening shift gave him access to different supervisors and workers, and he began to understand the full scope of the problems at his facility. The safety equipment was indeed outdated, with several machines operating with bypassed or broken safety features. Workers mentioned that reporting safety concerns often resulted in being labeled as troublemakers by management. The pace of production was driven by quotas that seemed unrealistic, forcing workers to take shortcuts that increased the risk of accidents. "It's gotten worse since the new ownership took over," explained Janet, a woman who had worked there for over 20 years. "They're all about the numbers now. Used to be, if something wasn't safe, you could shut it down and fix it. Now, they want you to keep running no matter what." Marcus felt sick knowing that he was the new ownership Janet was referring to. His acquisition of the factory had been handled by his business development team, who had focused entirely on profit margins and operational efficiency. No one had mentioned employee safety or working conditions in any of their reports. During his break, Marcus called Jennifer from his fake phone. "I need you to pull all the safety reports and workers' compensation claims for Millbrook for the past 2 years. Also, get me the contact information for whoever is handling the Rosa Martinez case." "Sir, I have to ask, what exactly are you doing? Your absence is causing quite a stir here. The board is asking questions." Marcus watched his co-workers heading back to their stations, their faces showing the fatigue of people who worked too hard for too little. "Tell the board I'm conducting an important field investigation. That's all they need to know for now." That night, Marcus researched workers' compensation law and his company's insurance policies. What he discovered was deeply troubling. Wellington Industries had switched to a cheaper insurance provider shortly after acquiring the Millbrook factory, one known for aggressively fighting claims. The policy included clauses that made it difficult for injured workers to receive fair compensation, and the company had hired a law firm that specialized in minimizing payouts. Marcus realized that his cost-cutting measures, implemented to maximize profits, had created a system that actively worked against his own employees when they needed help most. The $15 million he had saved annually on insurance premiums paled in comparison to the human cost of those savings. The following morning, Marcus arrived at work to find the entire factory buzzing with tension. During the night shift, there had been another accident. A young worker named David had been injured when a piece of equipment malfunctioned, and he had been taken to the hospital with a serious cut on his leg. "Same machine that got Rosa," Tom muttered during the morning briefing. "They keep saying they're going to fix it, but they never do." The factory supervisor, Mr. Henderson, addressed the workers with obvious irritation. "The machine has been inspected and is safe to operate. The accident was caused by employee error. Anyone who has concerns about safety can speak to HR, but production schedules must be maintained." Marcus watched the faces of his co-workers as Henderson spoke. He saw fear, anger, and resignation. These people knew they were working in dangerous conditions, but they also knew they needed their jobs to survive. They were trapped between their safety and their livelihoods. During lunch, Marcus approached Sarah and asked about visiting Rosa. "I heard about what happened to her, and I'd like to help if I can. Maybe contribute to a collection or something." Sarah studied his face carefully. "You're different from most people who come through here, Mike. Most folks are just trying to keep their heads down and get by. Why do you care so much about Rosa?" Marcus struggled to find an answer that wouldn't reveal his true identity. "I guess I just think people should look out for each other, especially when someone gets hurt working to support their family." Sarah nodded slowly. "Rosa's proud, but her family is really struggling. Her daughter Maria works part-time at the grocery store after school to help with expenses. She's a smart kid, was planning to go to college next year, but now—" She shrugged sadly. "Could you introduce me to her? To Rosa, I mean. I'd like to meet her." "I'll ask her. But Mike, be careful. Around here, management doesn't like workers who ask too many questions or get too involved in other people's business. I'd hate to see you get in trouble when you're just trying to do the right thing." That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He called Jennifer and gave her specific instructions to begin implementing immediate safety improvements at the Millbrook facility, regardless of cost. He also instructed her to contact the company's legal department and have them review Rosa Martinez's workers' compensation case personally. "Sir, these changes will cost several $1 million and significantly impact quarterly profits," Jennifer warned. Marcus looked around the factory floor, watching his employees work in conditions he now understood were unacceptable. "Jennifer, sometimes the right thing to do is more important than the profitable thing to do. Make the changes happen." As his shift ended, Marcus knew that his undercover investigation was approaching a critical point. Tomorrow he planned to visit Rosa Martinez and her family, not as the billionaire owner of the company, but as Mike Wheeler, a fellow worker who cared about their well-being. He had no idea that this visit would lead to discoveries that would shake the very foundation of his business empire. Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a glittering circuit board. At 38, he controlled a business empire worth $12 billion, with factories, shopping centers, and office buildings scattered across 3 continents. His name appeared on Forbes lists and business magazines, always accompanied by photos of him in perfectly tailored suits, shaking hands with world leaders and celebrities. But today, something felt different. The quarterly reports spread across his mahogany desk showed record profits from his manufacturing division, yet the numbers felt hollow. His assistant had mentioned employee complaints during their morning briefing, something about working conditions, at the textile factory in Millbrook, a small town 3 hours outside the city. The factory had been acquired 2 years ago as part of a larger deal, and Marcus had never visited it personally. "Sir, your car is ready for the board meeting," his assistant Jennifer announced through the intercom. Marcus loosened his silk tie and made an unexpected decision. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the week. And Jennifer, I need you to do something unusual for me." 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from his private elevator wearing faded jeans, work boots, and a plain gray t-shirt. His usually perfect hair was messed up, and he had traded his gold watch for a cheap digital one from the gift shop downstairs. Jennifer handed him a fake ID and employment documents she had somehow managed to create. "Your name is Mike Wheeler, and you're looking for factory work," she explained, still looking puzzled by his request. "I've arranged for you to stay at a small motel in Millbrook under that name." The drive to Millbrook took Marcus through landscapes he had forgotten existed. Rolling hills gave way to farmland, then to a collection of modest houses and small businesses that seemed frozen in time. The motel was a simple building with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered intermittently. His room smelled like old carpet and cleaning supplies, a sharp contrast to his usual 5-star accommodations. That evening, Marcus walked through the town center, observing everything with fresh eyes. He ate dinner at a small diner where the waitress called him honey and the coffee came in thick white mugs. The food was simple but satisfying, and he found himself listening to conversations at nearby tables. People talked about their jobs, their families, their struggles to pay bills. It was a world completely removed from his usual environment of business deals and stock options. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Wellington Industries' Millbrook division, his own factory, as Mike Wheeler, job applicant. The building was larger than he had expected, a sprawling complex of gray concrete and metal roofing. The parking lot was filled with older cars and pickup trucks, many showing signs of wear and repair. Inside the employment office, Marcus sat among a dozen other job seekers on uncomfortable plastic chairs. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Patterson, according to her nameplate, processed applications with mechanical efficiency. When his turn came, she barely looked up from her paperwork. "Factory experience?" she asked. "Some," Marcus replied, trying to sound casual. "Can you work rotating shifts? Night work? Overtime when needed?" "Yes, ma'am. Pay starts at $14 an hour. Benefits after 90 days. Drug test is mandatory. Any questions?" Marcus almost laughed at the irony. $14 an hour from a company that had generated $40 million in profit last quarter alone. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." That afternoon, Marcus explored more of Millbrook. He discovered that many of the town's residents worked at his factory, and their lives revolved around its schedules and demands. He visited the grocery store where prices seemed high for a working-class community, and noticed that several shelves were poorly stocked. At the local gas station, he overheard workers discussing overtime hours and weekend shifts that interfered with family time. Back in his motel room, Marcus called Jennifer using his fake phone. "I need you to research our Millbrook operation thoroughly. Employee records, safety reports, profit margins, everything. Sir, is everything all right? This is very unusual behavior, even for you. Marcus looked out his window at the factory in the distance, its lights beginning to illuminate against the evening sky. I'm starting to think I don't know my own company, as well as I thought I did. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Marcus joined the stream of workers heading into the factory, their breath visible in the chilly air. He received a brief orientation from a tired-looking supervisor who explained the basics of textile production and safety procedures in about 15 minutes. Stay alert, follow the rules, and don't slow down the line, the supervisor concluded. Questions? Marcus was assigned to a section that processed raw materials into fabric components. The work was repetitive and physically demanding, requiring him to stand for hours while feeding materials into machines that created a constant din of mechanical noise. The air was thick with fabric fibers and the chemical smell of dyes and treatments. His co-workers were friendly but cautious around the newcomer. During the first break, he sat with a group of older workers who had been at the factory for years. They shared stories about their families, their second jobs, and their hopes for their children's futures. Marcus found himself genuinely interested in their lives in a way that surprised him. "You seem different from most new guys," commented Sarah, a woman in her 40s who operated one of the larger machines. "Most people our age who start here are pretty desperate." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "What do you mean?" "Well, the pay isn't great, and the work is hard. Usually, people your age have already found something better, or they've got problems that make other places not want to hire them." As the day progressed, Marcus began to notice things that troubled him deeply. Safety equipment was old and sometimes malfunctioned. The pace of work was relentless, with supervisors constantly pushing for higher productivity. Workers seemed stressed and tired, and several mentioned having to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. During lunch, Marcus sat alone and processed what he was experiencing. For the first time in his adult life, he understood what it meant to work for survival rather than success. These people weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet or line items in a quarterly report. They were real individuals with real struggles, and he was responsible for their working conditions. The day ended with Marcus's back aching and his hands stained with fabric dye. As he walked to his car, he overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two workers were discussing someone named Rosa Martinez, apparently a longtime employee who had been injured on the job. The details were unclear, but the tone of their voices suggested something serious had happened, and that the company's response had been inadequate. Marcus drove back to his motel with a growing sense that his undercover visit was about to reveal something much more significant than he had anticipated.